Hello, gathered friends. I'm Horror Nuba, and welcome to Bionicle Deep Dive, where we analyze the tropes, characters, and lore of LEGO Bionicle. In this video, I wanted to analyze as much as we know about the anatomy of the biomechanical creatures of the Bionicle universe, and see if we can determine just how organic and how robotic they really are. I also want to explore the themes of how these biomechanical beings view themselves as people, particularly in comparison to both the purely robotic and purely organic creatures that appear in the story. Let's dive right into it. The biomechanical nature of the Toa, Matoran, Rahi, and all the MU characters is one of the most interesting parts of Bionicle's world building. They're not just robots, they're living beings who are a fascinating blend of creature and machine. They're like cyborgs, except unlike many cyborgs who are often originally organic beings who later, through some form of injury or surgical enhancement, added on mechanical parts, the Matoran come into being as a perfectly integrated blend of biological and mechanical. Though how biological and how mechanical? Greg Farsi once stated that the MU inhabitants were about 85% mechanical and 15% organic. And it should be noted that he gave this answer after specifically consulting other members of the story team, so this is a broad consensus by the writers, and by all accounts is consistent with what we see in the story. But what about more specifically? We're never given any kind of biology textbook breakdown of their entire anatomy, but there are tons of bits and pieces referenced throughout the story that give us some good details. And there are tons and tons of brilliant fan interpretations of their anatomy that break it down in incredibly creative and detailed ways that we can draw inspiration from. There are more out there that I can go over in this video, but I will be providing links to some of the fan artworks and theories that I found while researching this video down in the description. Check them out if you have the time. So let's start from the outside going in, since we're given more references to their external appearance, and we'll do our best to draw inferences to their internal anatomy. In concept art from the Mask of Light movie, we can see an anatomical schematic of the character models used. And I gotta admit, this is one of the reasons I love the first three movies. Creative Capers really went the extra mile of fleshing out their designs beyond just the sets. They flipped the script, and instead of just basing the models off the toys, they dared to ask, what if these characters were really real, and the toys were simplifications of those more realistic versions? Like what if they were real biomechanical beings that evolved? And it's great, because it gives us a lot to work with in this video. Now, the outermost layer of MU inhabitants is always a layer of metallic armor. How much armor is often determined by their lifestyle. Beings more involved in danger and conflict have more armor than those who live peaceful lives. For example, Matoran have just light armor, just enough to cover some of their organic bits, whereas Toa have much heavier, more expansive armor designed to offer real protection and coverage. But they all wear at least some. It seems to be removable and customizable to an extent, though it is still treated as more a part of their body than, say, an article of clothing. They don't have skin, so in many ways their armor acts like an arthropod's exoskeleton. They seem to have either nerves or some kinds of sensors on their armor, as it's shown that they do have an acute sense of touch and can feel things that are on the surface of their armor. The most consistently referenced organic bits are muscle tissue. We can even see muscle fibers in the character models in the first trilogy of movies. Usually referenced as being directly underneath the armor, the muscles are what make the characters move. Shamad once notes that while seemingly mechanical, the MU inhabitants have a natural fluidity to their movement that pure robots didn't have, showing that their muscles allowed for much finer motor control. We read them being flexed, strained, and even damaged. When a blow manages to pierce or go around their armor, it's often the muscle tissue that's described as being hurt. In addition, their muscles also function as an important connective tissue that holds their armor together, as shown when the Toa arrived and were disassembled due to their organic parts having decayed after 1,000 years in stasis. Their muscles do seem to be aided by pistons and gears, those mechanical bits that seem to give them additional power. These are sometimes overtop their limbs at important joints, but there are also internal gears that seem to help them function. In addition, underneath their muscles also seems to be a metal internal skeleton that provides additional structure. As far as their faces, they seem to be mostly mechanical. Their eyes are mechanical, very clearly glowing with light when they are awake. Their ears have been described as audio receptors as well. In the movies, their mouths are also seem to be mechanical with a cylindrical area of teeth, tongue. I'm not sure, but it's in their mouth and it's made of metal. Though the presence of this also seems determined by the masks in the movies. Some masks have mouth openings that open and close with the mouth, revealing the inner mouthpieces, but some masks seem to have glowing electronics that light up as they speak. Now, members of the Skakti species, such as the Paraka, have a unique organic feature to their outer armor, which is their spines. They have the large external organic spikes that come out of their back, starting from their head and ending in a short tail. They also have spines going out from their shoulders to their upper arms that connect to the main spine. The pattern and shape of these spines varies across individuals. On their home island of Zakaz, there's actually a parasite called a spine slug that will attach to their spines and feed off of and encourage aggression, which some have used to get an edge in combat. Skakti faces are also organic, which is unique to the MU, and as such, their faces are not compatible with Kanohi masks. We do know that beings in the Matoran universe have organic lungs. Their lungs have been described many times, especially in situations such as when they're underwater and need to breathe. How long they can hold their breath is a little ambiguous, though some places seem to suggest that Toa and Skakti in particular seem to have relatively high lung capacities. In addition to needing to breathe, they also need to eat food and drink either fresh water or liquid protodermis. They are also shown both eating fruit and eating meat, or at least meat from biomechanical rahi, such as fish. In some of the post-canon online dialogues, Greg Farsi suggests that Matoran can sometimes absorb the energy from the food via their hands, maybe leaving a husk behind after the energy is absorbed. Both eating and drinking likely supports their organic components, as their biological cells would need hydration and nutrients. It's never confirmed whether or not they have blood or some analog to blood to distribute the nutrients, oxygen, and fresh water from across their bodies, but for the purposes of speculation, I'd say it's pretty likely. Their hearts seem to be mechanical, and that's what their heart light, the glowing light on their chest, seems to be. The flashing light of the heart light is consistently used in place of a beating of a heart. When they're alive and healthy, their heart light shines steadily. When in distress or out of breath, it flashes rapidly. And when they're dying, it blinks on and off, and when it goes out, their heart has stopped, and they are dead. In some of the dialogues with Greg Farsi, he referenced that he believes that they would need some sort of energy core to regulate the energies that flow through them and power them, and these cores have been linked to the heart lights. In addition, for their energy, the Matoran species, including Toa and Taraga, a significant portion of their energy comes from their Kanohi masks, and without their masks, they are significantly weakened and can even fall comatose. Okay, now for the most mysterious and debated part of their anatomy. Their brains. Are they made of squishy organic gray matter? Or are they wires, clockwork, and CPU? Or is it that inside of their heads is actually a tiny city populated and maintained by tiny Matoran, and that those Matoran are in turn piloted by even tinier Matoran? Is it Matoran all the way down? Okay, so there are strong arguments on both sides as to whether or not they have organic brains or robotic brains. This is actually a topic brought up several times during the Chat with Greg dialogues, and Greg Farsi consistently decided not to give a definitive answer. Which, honestly, I don't blame him for. With all the grief he got from canonizing certain things and a desire to keep at least some mystery left in the story, it makes sense he'd try to stay out of that one. Sometimes he seemed to lean more towards the electronic mechanical brain side, but officially stated that the answer was unknown. We do know that their minds were artificial intelligences, obviously, as they were all artificial. And to fit in with the Red Star and Velika storylines, they had to be able to be uploaded and downloaded. So we will have to take those pieces of knowledge into consideration no matter where we end up. I'll do my best to provide all the information we have on their minds, as well as the major arguments for the different interpretations of their brain here. And I'll give my own opinion on it right at the end. I'll start with some arguments for organic brains. First and foremost is their sapience. The capacity for thought and emotion is basically that of a real person, and identical to the Agoriospherus Magna, who were naturally occurring organic beings. In universe, that capacity just isn't there in purely robotic characters. It is made consistently clear throughout the story that their minds are very different from the minds of robots, with robots being immune to telepathy, whereas the biomechanical MU inhabitants, including Rahi beasts, could be affected. And the organic Agoria and Glatorian were also susceptible to telepathy, showing that whatever allows telepathy is common to both biomechanical creatures and organic ones, but not to the robotic characters. They had actual spirits, a distinction made clear by the Makuta's ability to possess robots and living beings that did not have a spirit inside them. The capacity for emotion that they possess is also something that is shown to make them distinct from robots. While there have been instances where it's deliberately debatable that robots are showing signs of emotion, most notably the Crawley, it is never in question whether the Matoran or even some of the Rahi are capable of emotion. And no matter what, we know that they had to have the ability to interface organic and mechanical components, since they have both. So either organic muscles would have to respond to mechanical signals, or mechanical parts would have to respond to organic signals. There are also already examples of purely organic brains interfacing with mechanical beings in Bionicle, such as the Krana. The Borak, who were evolved of Matoran, became purely mechanical and lost all their organic features, but came to require the organic Krana to act as their brains. Tren Kram, another fully organic being created by the Great Beings, also had terrifying mental abilities, showing another connection between the idea of organic brains and true minds. And as far as the ability to upload and download their minds, it is already evident that the Great Beings were capable of technology that could upload natural organic minds, since that's what Velika did to himself. Now, on the other hand, some arguments for mechanical brains are that even though they have full sentience, maybe they simply had a much different, more complex electronic brain than other robotic characters in the series, and that this much more advanced AI is what makes the difference rather than organic parts. For example, the Vaki were stated to use physical clockwork mechanisms to make computations rather than electronics, and they were capable of surprisingly complex thoughts just because of that. And the Vaki were designed by the Matoran themselves, while the Matoran were created by the Great Beings, who were capable of much higher levels of technology. It was also shown that when the Toa arrived, their organic parts had decayed away after 1,000 years in their canisters. They were kept alive by the stasis effects, but they needed to regrow their muscles and organs to put themselves back together. In spite of this, they were able to move their mechanical parts enough to reassemble themselves. So this suggests that, at the very least, the parts of their brain that control their mechanical bits are also mechanical. Though it isn't clear how conscious they were while doing this, and some media arguably portrays them as only becoming fully aware once they're reassembled. In any case, still are able to move and at least think enough to have motor skills while their organic parts are gone. Another point towards their having mechanical brains is the slang term cross-wired, which is used to call someone crazy or delusional. The idea of malfunctioning wires causing mental problems shows a cultural connection among them between electronics and their brains, so they obviously believe they have wires up there. Okay, so we can see there's a lot of strong points both ways. I actually posed this question on my Bionicle Tumblr blog to see what people said, and got a lot of interesting answers as to what other fans think. Link to the post down in the description. There's a ton of cool answers. Definitely check it out. Many people there lean towards a mixed brain of both circuits and neurons, with the organic parts of their brain controlling their organic muscles, and the electronic parts of their brains controlling their mechanical parts. Tired Space Dragon brought up an interesting point that when Onua was hit by a Ninra Ghost Blaster, which takes control of a being's mechanical parts, but does not affect their organics, he was still able to think perfectly well, which at the very least implies that their internal thoughts and emotions were not like the mechanical body parts that the blasters could control. Crystal Toa made an interesting theory that Velika, in his involvement in creating sapience among the Matoran, caused a mutation in their brains that caused them to go from just a basic organic nervous system to a more developed brain layer by layer, with the original motor skills and data memory being in the electronic core brain. One of the most fascinating and unique answers I got was a theory that their brains are actually crystalline in structure, which I had never even considered. This is based on them using knowledge and memory crystals in Kometru, which could store memory and data directly from Matoran minds for later use. They also identified the glowing translucent light piping in the back of the set's head as crystals, which, honestly, yeah, that's a pretty dope theory. Personally, I lean heavily towards their brains being a mix of organic neurons and electronic data. There are so many references to their brains being distinct from robot minds, to the point where characters can know if a being is a person just by the presence of organics. At the same time, they are artificial, and there are parts of their minds shown to be mechanical. The way I see it, the organic parts of their brain would provide their adaptability and capacity for developing emotional range, as well as interface with their muscles and organic parts. They'd also have cybernetic parts to their brains that controlled their mechanical movement, sensory input from their mechanical senses, and possibly other things as well. I see their memory storage as possibly mechanical, and the electronic data would then be easier to transfer to things like memory crystals. Mechanical memories would also explain how things like the Toa canisters and Matoran pods were capable of erasing their memories of events, but their core personalities and even training and muscle memory being saved in their organic brains that couldn't be erased as long as they could heal. This also opens up questions about the Red Star storyline. We know they were designed to be AI that could be downloaded, but which parts were savable? Would they save the electronic data but lose their organic personalities? Or maybe the other way around? We never got to see how that would end, but it is fun to think about. Okay, but so those are my thoughts on their anatomy. They're clearly complex organisms having to integrate all that biological tissue with mechanical components. It almost makes you wonder why the great beings who created them opted to make them biomechanical at all. Especially since they were never actually meant to be truly alive in the first place, just drones designed to keep the Matoran universe running. You'd think it'd be easier to just make them robots. I think I have some ideas as to why. So we see throughout the story that the organic components of their bodies are much more vulnerable than their mechanical ones. This, however, seems to be offset by the fact that their organic tissues have immense healing capacities. Injuries to their organic components seem to be healed within minutes and never cause lasting damage. This healing factor could also explain certain feats of high stamina they've demonstrated. The most extreme example of their healing ability is when the Toa arrived on the island of Matsunui. They were all disassembled. After floating in the ocean for 1,000 years, their organic components literally decomposed. But by fusing their mechanical parts back together, they were able to regrow new tissue in what seemed to be a matter of minutes. However, they may have also been saved by the status effect of the canisters keeping them alive until they could do that, because we see other injuries that seem less intense, killing characters outright. Since it's possible for them to survive at least temporarily without their organics, perhaps there must be sustained damage to both the mechanical and organic parts to kill them. Indeed, organic injuries are more often treated as less severe. That said, it is still possible to kill them with the death of their organic components, since they can die of suffocation, starvation, or dehydration, all of which would primarily affect their organic tissue rather than any of their metal parts. But when checking themselves after moderate injuries, they often note that while their organic tissue was damaged, their mechanical parts remain intact. Afterwards, it doesn't seem to take them very long to heal. On the other hand, much more grievous injuries that involve their mechanical components are treated as much harder to manage, and often they will have to see a very skilled mechanic to get repairs. In extreme cases, this was originally supposed to be the role of Karzani, to repair the Matoran for extreme damage to them, though we see how that turned out. But all this might offer insight as to why the Great Beings made them biomechanical at all. In addition to the fluidity of motion their muscles give them, the ability to heal from minor injuries without the need for repairs is a great asset, especially since the MU inhabitants would be all functioning autonomously. They would need to be able to handle more problems on their own, because they wouldn't have the Great Beings to make adjustments. That need to be able to act autonomously and deal with unforeseen problems might also explain why they might be given organic brains capable of complex thought. In real life, one of the biggest differences between organic brains and computer processors is that brains are much more flexible. They have what's known as neuroplasticity, which is what allows them to create new neural pathways to learn and adapt more easily, while computer processors can only learn by drawing averages from massive amounts of crunching data. They can't make new connections, though. The connections that are already in are pre-programmed, they're hard. They just have to keep crunching the data in new ways and drawing new averages. Whereas organic brains can literally create new pathways and connections. Since the great beings knew that their creations would be facing unforeseen problems without their help, the ability to adapt would have been vital. What the great beings didn't realize, however, was that this adaptability might have been what eventually gave them the capacity for full sentience and the ability to have thoughts and emotions of their own. They were now capable of both good and evil. Something that I find fascinatingly ironic about the Matoran universe characters is their opinions on real robots, given the fact that they themselves are nearly robots. But while outsiders, and humans like us, might not see the difference, to them it is a very important distinction. To them, biomechanical beings like themselves are truly alive, while robots were just considered just machines and not actually alive. And that distinction had very real moral implications, because while the honor code of the Toa forbids them from killing sapient life, they had zero qualms about destroying robots. As I said before, the great beings didn't consider the Matoran to be real living people when they were made. They were just supposed to be biomechanical workers used to keep the Matoran universe functioning. But that's not at all how they came to see themselves. As they evolved and developed their sapience, they came to truly care about themselves and each other. They made myths and spirituality, told stories of their origins, and developed morals and ideals that, in some cases, they were willing to die for. To them, they were fully and completely people. They considered themselves normal and natural, able to choose their own paths and destinies, and considered their lives to be valuable and meaningful. They knew they were created by the great beings, and that machines were involved in making new Matoran, but to them, coming to being like this was just normal. It's all they ever knew. They didn't think of themselves as artificial life. And after all, many human cultures have our origins as being made by God or gods, and we still consider ourselves to be natural. Maybe to the Matoran, being built by the great beings was their divine origin. Just something to think about, you know? It's very interesting how the theme of finding very sacred beliefs in things that to outsiders might seem normal and banal is such a prevalent theme all throughout Bionicle. Now, in contrast to their thoughts on robotic beings, their opinions on fully organic life forms are equally fascinating in a different way. Multiple times, when confronted with a fully organic beings, the biomech characters consider them to be strange and alien and a little disgusting. The Toa were thrown by the fully organic trees and plant life they found when they first arrived on the island of Motunui. Biological reproduction is a strange concept to them, as shown by when Jaller and Kongu were unprepared for the sea squid hatching from eggs, rather than coming to being in the normal way. Tren Krom's fully organic, tentacled form was considered so hideous and alien that it drove people to madness, not at all helped by his terrifying psychic abilities. The softness of his pure flesh was considered gelatinous compared to their hard metal bodies. However, it should be noted that, while alien, they still looked at organic creatures as actually alive, just very weird. So we can see that the presence of organic biology is a key component to their cultural thoughts on life. I also sometimes wonder why the characters in the story were made biomechanical from an out-of-universe perspective. The writers could have easily just made a story about purely mechanical robots who are also fully sentient people. There's plenty of stories like that. Just take Transformers, for instance. The sets don't have any obvious organic components. They really just look like robotic figures, so their biomechanical nature is an informed piece of the lore that the creators added in for us, the audience, to know about them. So they wanted to make that distinction, even though they didn't have to. I like to think, and this is just my own musing, that they were made biomechanical because one of the key themes in Bionicle is the integration of technology and nature. The idea that these two things don't have to be opposites, but can work in concert with each other. By making them both natural and technological, they were the walking embodiment of that theme, and their connections to the natural world feel more, well, organic. But that's my analysis on the biomechanical nature of the Bionicle characters and its significance to the broader themes in the story. What do you guys think? Do you like my breakdown of their anatomy, or do you have your own interpretation that you'd like to share? Where do you fall on the brain debate? And what are your thoughts on how the story handles the theme of what it truly means to be alive and a person? Let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care, my gathered friends.